Hello, and welcome to the Public Square, a show that explores religious liberty issues and public affairs issues that affect our nation and beyond. I'm your host, Pastor Paul Goodrich, and I'm the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the South Central Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, located in Nashville, Tennessee. In each episode, we'll talk to people who are on the front lines for the fight for civil and religious liberty. Our goal is to inform about issues that directly and indirectly have an impact on everyday life, ignite meaningful thought and reflection, inspire our audience to action, and integrate faith principles in how we relate to others. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of community engagement as it relates to the church's role and responsibilities. We'll also talk about community organizing as a valuable tool for community engagement. And then finally, we'll hear from the Southern Union about what's happening around the South Central Conference territory in the area of public affairs and religious liberty. So thank you for joining us. And let's meet in the public square. My first three guests are pastors who are currently engaged and who are engaging their churches in working with their communities around the South Central Conference territory. My first guest is Pastor Troy Brand, who currently serves as the pastor of the Orchard Park Seventh-day Adventist Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee. In this role, Pastor Brand has launched the Chattanooga Purpose Center, along with its main initiative, the Getting Ahead Anti-Poverty Program. He's charged the members to become embedded in the community. And leading by example, Pastor Brand is an active participant in the Community Advisory Board, the One Kingdom, One Church Race Relations Fellowship, the Chattanooga Clergy for Justice Initiative, and he is also part of the Advisory Board of Kingdom Partners. Previously, he served as a member of the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department Minority Relations Task Force and the Tennessee District 28 Health Task Force. He's also the initiator of the Lead Anti-Racism Pledge campaign, and he believes that it's his congregation's mission to do ministry in such a way as to turn the volume down in the lives of people so they can hear the gospel clearly. Welcome, Pastor Brand. All right.
Oh, man, thank you, Elder. Appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Joining him is Pastor Corey Jackson, who's the senior pastor of the New Covenant Church in Memphis, Tennessee. Pastor Jackson was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and became a Seventh-day Adventist Christian several years ago. But interestingly, before becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, he was studying to become a Black Muslim and a Black Panther. So that may be a topic for another discussion. But right now he's an ordained minister of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And his personal statement comes from John 15:16. You have not chosen me, but I've chosen you and ordained you that you should go and bring forth fruit. Welcome, Pastor Jackson.
Thank you, Pastor Goodrich, for having me tonight. It's a pleasure.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And finally, we also have Pastor Thea Wilson, who is the senior district pastor of churches in Selma, Thomasville, and Camden in Alabama. In addition to her church responsibilities, Pastor Wilson is the co-host of Wake Up Ministries, a morning global devotional program that reaches people around the world every morning at 5 a.m. And she's also the founder of Real Women for God Ministry, which draws a wide variety of women from different age groups and backgrounds. Welcome, Pastor Wilson.
Thank you, Pastor Goodrich, for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right. Well, listen, I want to dive into our topic this evening is where is the church? Public affairs and community engagement. And so I've asked each of you to come in because right now you are knee deep, or I should say head deep, in community engagement within your churches. So let me begin with you, Pastor Brand. Tell us a little bit about your experience and what has you so impassioned about being involved in the community.
Basically, back in I think 98, me and my wife, we decided to move our family from the traditional church, to a community engaged church in Baltimore. Baltimore City Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's no longer in existence, unfortunately. But this church, every single weekend, was out in the community, passing out clothing, passing out food, and it was actually open 5 days a week to meet the community's needs with all kind of different resources. And from that time, we had a burning passion to recreate that type of ministry. And we saw lives change. We saw a whole different type of demographic come into the church, and that thing just kind of burned in us. And so when I got assigned to be a pastor in Mississippi, it was just natural to pick up from where we left off because I had, the influence, the control. I was the pastor, the leader of the church, and to move that church into the community in Mississippi and every other congregation I've pastored since then, I've done that.
Okay. Well, let me go around the square here. Pastor Jackson, where has your passion for community engagement come from?
Well, I think it comes from the previous background of wanting to be a Black Panther and Black Muslim when I was in college in my 1990. And I was very observant of the work that the entities that were mentioned were doing in the community. And so the college I went to, we were very engaged in the community because we oftentimes looked at the ills of our communities, and we all decided that we need to do something about it. And back then, during those times, I wasn't in the church, but all the music I listened to talked about pro-Black awareness and how we need to take care of our communities and how we need to take care of our men and our women and our children. So that kind of spun it. And then when I became a pastor, it just, like Troy said, it was just natural. It's part of the DNA. So wherever I've been, my goal is to have an imprint in the community somehow, some way, beyond just the spiritual part.
Okay. Thank you. And Pastor Wilson, same question to you.
I would say that it definitely would come from being an educator in the urban setting. It is always so vitally important that you don't just connect with students in the classroom, but you connect with them in the community. So before I became a pastor, I was an educator. And being out in the community was a vital piece in being able to connect with my students and with their family. And of course, after just spending time as an elder, it just was that imprint. Once I became a pastor, it was to bring all of those tools and make that same imprint in the community in which I now pastor.
Okay. Thank you. Before we, dive in a little bit more, I just want to remind those of you who are watching, who are joining us, that we welcome your comments. And if you have any questions, we welcome you to put that in the chat, and we will do our very best to answer the questions we can as time permits. But I do have a question that, and I'm going to start with Pastor Brad. So you shared how you wanted to be intentional about changing the focus of your church to just a regular church, to become a church that is very much embedded in the community. So share some of the things that you are doing, especially now in Chattanooga, Tennessee, at the Orchard Park Seventh-day Adventist Church?
Well, one of the things I want to just kind of lean in or lead into it with what you just said. I told the church from the very beginning when I got here, I said, listen, we want to be, I want our church to be so embedded in the community that we influence directly or indirectly everything that happens in this city. And that's a lofty goal. In other words, people get elected, we had an influence on it some kind of way. Uh, um, Businesses open, we had an influence, directly or indirectly. Get on
Yeah.
every board, everything. We need to be everywhere in the city, and the way we do that is by moving from the pew to the community. And so we started off. We do well. Let me just say what we do right now. We have two programs that we launched from our Purpose Center. The first program you mentioned in the introduction, the Getting Ahead and the Just Getting By World Anti-Poverty Program. That program moves people from poverty to self-sufficiency. It's an 8-week, 16-class program where people learn different mental models and ways of thinking about their situation. They create a plan and they move out. Number two, we do a program called Faith and Finance. This is not the regular old finance class where you make a budget and you pay down your debt type thing. The Dave Ramsey program. This one is geared toward people who are usually lower income. We talk about payday loans and teach them how to avoid those high interest
Yeah.
loans
Yeah.
and just
Predatory
different
loans.
little
Yeah.
financial things that don't come with Dave Ramsey's type program. And so those are our two main programs right now. We also do a Tech Goes Home program in partnership with one of the nonprofits here in the city. What we want to do is we try to do things a little bit differently. We recognize that in order to make an imprint, in order to have that influence and to be embedded, we have to stand out just a bit. There are several churches that have excellent feeding programs. The New Life Seventh-day Adventist Church here, our sister church, their program is excellent. So we don't want to compete with their feeding program. We just recommend people to them and let
Yes.
them excel in that. And so we try to find a niche where nobody else is doing their program. So we do those programs. We also have a summer program called STEP, Summertime Enrichment Program, where we bring kids in, they get academics, and they also get a chance to engage in fun activities during the summer. We do Compassion Sabbath. A lot of churches go out, second Sabbath of the month, and we do acts of kindness in the community. We have our members and we encourage them to get on different kinds of boards, things of that nature. We do all of those things. On the screen, you see, we try to engage in three areas: financial, health, and education. And so that's where our ministries are focused.
Okay. Sorry. So you mentioned something, and I don't want to gloss over this, but you talked about Purpose Center. Tell us a little bit more about that phrasing.
Well, what we recognize is it's one thing for people to make contact with a church. And when they make contact with the church, they have an expectation that comes with that. The church has worship. The church may have some children's programs and so forth. But when we are very deliberate and intentional about when we established our Chattanooga Purpose Center, we wanted to have a place that people connect with us and understand they come in with no direction. And when they leave from us or after they've been with us, they will have direction or leave with purpose. And so, and what that means basically is this. We want to make sure, like I said, we want to turn the volume down in the lives of people. A volume meaning the social ills of life, whether it's poverty, illiteracy, social injustice, whatever it is. We want to turn that volume down so they can hear the gospel clearly. We recognize that people don't care about the three angels' messages when they're hungry, when the police department is beating them upside the head, when they can't get housing justice. And so we work in all those different areas to try to help turn the volume down. The Purpose Center has been established for that. So at our church right now, every community ministry we do runs through the Purpose Center. In other words, we don't have the community services department. Our purpose center is our community services department, and every ministry we do runs through that. We write our grants in the context of the purpose center. When we go out into the community and members introduce themselves, those of us who are on the front lines of community engagement, we say, I'm going to say, when I introduce myself, Pastor Troy Brand from the Orchard Park Seventh-day Adventist Church, where we house the Chattanooga Purpose Center, and we host its main initiative, the Getting Ahead and the Just Getting By World program. Instantly, people are listening because churches don't have that. And when we engage, as you see on the screen, we engage with relief ministries from the Purpose Center. That's our Compassion Sabbaths. We do our human development, the Getting Ahead program, Faith and Finance program, Tech Goes Home program. We partner with a group here in Chattanooga called Caleb for Community Development, the Bail Fund Initiative, where we help people with, getting out of jail who don't have enough money to make bail, and also help with their housing, because Chattanooga, like a lot of cities, the housing prices have skyrocketed, and so we were trying to get some affordable housing. And then we also do policy engagement. We are very deliberate with holding the police department accountable at our church for how they abuse folk under their arrest, whether they're black or white. We don't care. The police cannot just beat up on citizens, and so we hold them accountable to that. And all of this is done through the Chattanooga Purpose Center.
Okay. So part of what you talked about was in terms of meeting needs, and I know Pastor Jackson, that's something that you are very much engaged in within your church. By the way, Thomas Wilson asked the question: if your church was no longer in your community, would it be missed? And I think that's a very poignant question that we need to ask ourselves as pastors, as leaders of congregation. What are we doing in our community? So, Pastor Jackson, I know there's some specific initiatives that you are doing with your church, in terms of trying to meet the unique needs of individuals within the community. Share some of what you're doing.
Well, it's interesting that question came, because that's the question that I've asked my church: if we left this place, would they miss us? And so our goal is to make sure that if that ever happens, which we hope it won't, that they will. One of the things about us here, I've been here about 4 years with my wife and I, Janet Jackson, we've decided that we need to make an imprint here. In this community, our church was not as present as it should have been. So what we wanted to do is to begin letting folk know who we are, and that we're not just people who go to church on Saturdays for a drive-in moment and then leave. But we wanted people to see the human side of the church. And so, like Pastor Troy, what we've done, we've gotten rid of our name, Community Service, and we call everything Isaiah 58. And it's based upon the Isaiah 58 chapter. And so everything that we do is centered around meeting the needs of the people in every way possible. So we have a food program. We have a food pantry. We do sickle cell blood drives. We do everything and anything that we can do to make ourselves available for the community. We use the church to host Lifeline series, and anything community related, we're here. We adopted a school down the street called Jeter Academy, where we are looking to do mentoring programs and things of that nature. So we do everything possible that relates to the community. We have an excellent. Go ahead.
No. I think we have a video that we want to show that kind of encapsulates a little bit about Isaiah 58. So let's show that video now.
Isaiah 58. The word comes from on high. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Then shall your light break forth like the dawn. Your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger, and speaking wickedness, if you pour out yourself for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as the noonday.
That's great. That's great. A number of different initiatives where you sought to be proactive in taking care of some needs. But maybe I'll ask Pastor Wilson to kind of jump in at this point, because you're in a unique situation in terms of this wasn't about you being proactive. This was about something being thrust upon you. Those of you who may not have been aware, back in January, there was a series of tornadoes that came, and they really took a toll on Selma, Alabama, which is where one of the churches that you pastor, Pastor Wilson. So tell us a little bit about what was happening. I know you've been ripping and running ever since then. So tell us about what happened, what the aftermath of that is, and what you are doing in terms of dealing with the community in a crisis situation.
Some of you may know, but on January the 12th, Selma was hit by a devastating tornado that ripped through Selma, a very historical, we know have a strong history and a historical place. It left many parts of Selma devastated. We have over 1,000 people who are now in hotels and motels. And yes, where we have become reactive. Um, we have already served close to 3,000 people since January the 12th. We opened our doors immediately, and we began to respond to the need of all of to respond to the needs of the citizens who didn't know where they were going to go, who were already struggling economically, who didn't quite live in the best part of Selma, and now a devastating storm have wiped out close to 2,000, affected close to 2,000 citizens of Selma. And so on January the 13th at 10 a.m., we had a meeting, and I spoke with our church board, and they pretty much said, Pastor, what do you think we ought to do? And I said, this is what we should do. We should become a disaster relief center for the citizens of Selma. My church, by the grace of God, God kept his hand on Temple Gate.
Praise God.
The pictures that you just seen are some pictures are just 2 blocks away on our east and on our west. When I say we sit in the circle of total destruction and devastation, I believe that God kept his hand upon Templegate, that we could be a light in this sometimes what in the beginning looked like a hopeless situation. But we have opened our doors to serve the citizens of Selma. We're open um, every day, Sunday, a Sunday to a Saturday, and when we opened the door. You probably were able to view some pictures. The line is already wrapped around the block. Um, People are in need of the things that we often take for granted. And so we are there. Um, Before the truck arrived, I used my visa to my own finances to begin to kind of lift that need and put the things that we knew that the citizens were going to need. Out of that have just we have had the opportunity to collaborate with so many different churches, from the Presbyterian church. I was in a meeting today where I've been asked to be a part of the Nehemiah Project, where ministers of all different faiths will come together and talk about the long term recovery of the citizens of Selma. I was asked to be the vice president of the long term recovery committee because ever since January the 13th, our doors were open. We were serving a hot meal. If you came for household goods, toiletry items, we also were serving a hot meal every day. The other churches in the community were serving a bag lunch. We I have some very strong seniors who were determined that they were going to give a hot meal every
Yes,
day.
they,
They were going to provide a
yes.
place where they could charge their phone, where they could contact family to let them know where they were. So our church just became a refuge. Sometimes we just had people that just came in and just sat down and just took a deep breath and just began to cry. And I'll never forget one of our seniors said, go ahead and I take some soup. The soup will make everything better. And we all laughed because the soup did make it a little bit better, and we were able to
Yes.
pray with her, and we were able to counsel with her. And we asked her what she needed, and she said, "I need everything." And so we
Mm.
immediately began to pull together everything. Um, January, we did have some families having to sleep in our fellowship hall. We did whatever it took to become a relief, a refuge center for those um, who had no place to go and no
Wow.
family to turn to.
That's
And
amazing.
it's been a humbling experience. I want to say hats off to the volunteers. They have tirelessly worked
Hmm.
Amen.
from January the 13th to current. I don't have to say, "Where are you?" They beat me there sometimes. And so
Wow. Wow.
um,
Wow.
it's been a very humbling experience.
That's tremendous. That's tremendous. So let me just ask you, because I'm thinking about it. You said you're open every day. So what about the Sabbath?
Every day.
Do you stop meeting the needs on Sabbath so that you can have, your regular worship service and etc. and the needs are put on hold? How does it work on Sabbaths?
We almost have something very similar to a pull up and praise. Our praise team is outside. They're still singing. We have service outside. People stop on the street. They're singing the songs with, and they're praising God right from the sidewalk. And we're still serving. The people are praising God in their car. They're listening to the praise team. They are in their car. Um, Very touching moment was while we were serving. One of the volunteers that was coming from Mississippi to help us this past Sabbath was in the line. And they said, "I thought that it was a traffic jam." And so I was just sitting in traffic. And he said, "Then I realized that was the line to get to the church to to get some help."
Yes.
But people are just coming. Um, we had a neighbor that said, "We want to feed the volunteers. You all are
Oh,
always feeding
wow.
the
Wow.
community." And she sent sweet potato pie, and she didn't know how to cook grillers, but she sent the grillers for us to cook. And but she said, I just want to just feed you all." We had one lady just pull over, and she said, "I want to pray for you, Pastor."
Mm.
She said, "Because you're always praying for others." We
Yes.
Amen.
have some stories. We have some stories, and um, we've had some of the citizens come back, and they said, "You've blessed us. What can we
Mm.
do to reach the other citizens in the community who are still
Yes.
struggling?" It's been a great experience. We've laughed, we've cried, and we've laughed and we've cried. But we're watching people. We're watching people, a community with in the past have had so much racial
Hmm.
divisiveness
Hmm.
begin to
Hmm.
come back together. I'm
Amen. Amen.
watching, sitting at the table today, you could hear the words of Martin Luther King be echoed in your ear, because when I looked around the table, everyone didn't look like me, but the
Yes.
goal was the same. The
Yes.
mission was the same. And at the end of the day, when we walked away from that meeting, you understood that if we cut each other, we all bleed the same.
Yes.
So the mission
Absolutely.
have
Absolutely.
to be the same.
Absolutely. So listen, pastors, we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to ask each of you in terms of, and you can kind of respond, but um, you've inspired us by what you're doing in the community, whether it's a stance that you take from the get-go. We are going to be a purpose center. We are going to this is our focus, or whether you decide we're going to meet some intentional needs in the community, or whether you just have situations thrust upon you and you have to respond. You've inspired us. Now, and there may be other churches, there may be other pastors, maybe there's members, some members who are watching this, who say, "Well, I want our church to get more involved in the community." How can our churches begin to get more involved in our and engaged in our communities? And if you
I'll
can
go
answer,
first.
yeah. Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, what I suggest is you follow this method that our church uses. It's called the P4 Community Engagement Method. And basically, that stands for engage pastors, engage parish, engage parishioners, and engage partnerships. The pastor first has to be engaged if he wants the church to move in. He can't just tell people to do it and he doesn't do it himself. Then you have to have initiatives that are church-wide initiatives that moves your church, your congregation from the pew to the community. You also have to have members who are engaged outside of the church. In other words, they do community stuff that's not necessarily associated with the church, but understanding is still Christ's ministry. And then you have to have some partnerships. You can't do it by yourself. And so this P4 method is what I suggest as a way to become community engaged.
Okay, okay.
Well, one of the things I suggest, I agree, it starts with the pastor, but also the church has to be honest with itself and determine which ministries do they want to do. Sometimes we engage in 12 different ministries and nothing works. And so what we decided here is what will be our focus that we can be successful at, meaning that we can see some results from. And so once we've had these discussions, this buy-in and the excitement of it, and then our church begun. But we had to have some honest conversations about who we are in this community, how people see us in this community, and then what imprint or impression do we want to leave this community. And so once we've done that, now we put a plan together and we do it according to the needs of the community, not us telling what the community needs are.
Okay, okay. Pastor Wilson?
I would have to say hats off to Pastor Fordham. I had just finished up my cohort, being
Hmm.
moving my church from um, being spirit led and mission driven.
Driven,
And
yes.
we were right at the beginning of that process. And we were wondering what is it that we do well? And through this tragedy, we were able to realize what it was that we do well. um, I think it's so important, that philosophy that's used is to be mission led and spirit driven, to
Yes.
seek God's face and to ask God to empty you of yourself and what your agenda is. And and thinking, because I'm the pastor, I know exactly what we're supposed to be doing, and
Mm,
I know what we're supposed to be doing in the community. But saying to God, what is it that you would have us to do? How
yeah.
is it that you would have us to reach the community, that your character may be reflected, that your light may be shined in the community, that you may draw people to you and not necessarily to a church?
Yes,
Hallelujah.
yes. Well, I know BCTA ministry talked about, says, I know for a fact that the Chattanooga church would be missed if there were no more, if there were to be no more. And I can strongly say the same thing about New Covenant and the same thing about Temple Gate, that you are making such an impact in the community that if something were ever to happen to the church, you would be missed. But we have just 1 minute left. I would be remiss without, because we're talking about community engagement. I would be remiss without asking for your just initial um, response, and in terms of the Tyree Nichols situation, the 29-year-old black man who was brutally beaten by 5 black police officers and later died. Now, while I'm not necessarily looking at dealing with the merits of the case, but as we talk about community engagement, um, in situations like that, what can we do as a church, either in response to that, or to try to prevent those kinds of things, being proactive and as opposed to reactive. Just maybe in 1 minute or so, what can we do? What should we do as a church?
Well, the
Well,
church has to push for policy change. Um, what we saw it happens all the time. Every incident doesn't make the news. So real quick, you have to organize with other community leaders who are dealing directly with your local sheriff's department or local police department, and asking for policy changes on the use of force policies. There's an initiative called 8 Can't Wait. 8 policy changes to most use of force policies across the nation. Get your church behind that 8 Can't Wait initiative and join with other churches in the community and become proactive so that this doesn't happen in your city.
Okay.
just to add what Pastor Troy said, is what I inform my church is the church has to have influence. And one of the things, because we don't have influence, we're not sought after for advice or counsel. And so if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, and oftentimes on the menu. And so we have to be at the table. And in order to be at the table, we have to have influence politically, judicially, economically, and educationally. If we have those 4 influences, then we can make a change, or we won't see these things happen in our community at all. We don't hear about this same stuff happening in a lot of rich neighborhoods because they have economic power, they have political power, they have judicial power, and they have educational power. Because we don't have that, and then we don't take pride in ourselves, then they think they can treat us any kind of way. And we must begin to have a more powerful influence so that we're not continuing to be on the menu and be at the table where decisions are made.
Okay. Pastor
I have to
Wilson?
piggyback. I have to piggyback off of Pastor Jackson. We have to be present at the table. If there's one thing that I've learned through this crisis, is you have to be present at the table. You have to be proactive and not reactive. You have to have a voice in education. You have to have a voice in the judicial system. You have to have a voice in the political arena and also education. Because if you don't have a voice, when you become reactive, you will not have a voice.
Yes.
Let me say that again. If you don't have a voice at the table, if you were not visible at the table, when a crisis arises, you will not have a voice and you will be invisible. And we must take a stand and not be reactive, but we must be proactive. And we must begin to have open dialogue about the things that are happening in our world and stop hiding and saying that's not an issue for the church. Christ dealt with the same issues that we're dealing with today.
All right. Well,
But
listen.
I know we got to go, Pastor Derek, real quick, if I may. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
One of the things in just listening to these two talk about being proactive, the Chattanooga Clergy for Justice, we've already filed with the Department of Justice policies and practices complaints. So if something were to go national in this city, we already have on record a track record of issues with the department.
Yes.
So we have to be proactive.
Okay. Well, listen, I have really enjoyed hearing from you in this discussion. I've been inspired by it. I know our viewing audience has as well. I want to thank each and every one of you. And we're going to take a break and come back in the next segment, and where we'll talk a little bit about being proactive in terms of having a voice and making your voice known, as we look to talk about community. The word has just left me. Community activism. Sorry. Okay, so. So we're back, and my next guest is LeGarrette Crawford, who is a community organizer here in Huntsville, Alabama. He has a passion for working with the community, and we want to welcome him. I think he may be a little, we may have a little technical issue. So if not, oh, okay, there you are. LeGarrette Crawford, who is very much on the front lines of dealing with the community as a community organizer. So welcome to the Public Square, LeGarrette.
Thank you for having me, Pastor Goodrich. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So very briefly, what is community organizing?
So community organizing is really getting individuals who share the same common issues and concerns that is going on in the city. That's number one. And what I do as a community organizer, I gather those individuals together and I teach them how to be effective social justice leaders or effective organizers themselves. And what they do, they'll go back out to the community and ask questions and see who else share that same concern or that same issue just like we do. And we come together and we begin planning. We begin trying to make changes. And what we do here with Faith in Action Alabama, we use what you call an organizing model. The first thing we do, we have what you call one-to-ones with individuals, and that's when you listen and you learn about issues from people in the community. And once you listen to them, you have to be very intentional as well, listening to these concerns. And once we get enough individuals together, we move on to the next step. And in order to make a change in the community, we have to hold research actions with those individuals who have the power to make changes, like your city officials, like your DA, your sheriff, your mayor, your city councils, your county commissioners. We have to build relationships with them as well. So once we get the one-to-ones, we move on to research actions. We get them in the room and we ask questions, and we ask them how they got started in politics. We build a relationship with them as well. And most of all, before we leave that space, we ask for what we put an ask on the table. Can you do this, or can you make this policy change for this? Yes or no, and that's what we do. And then we move on to the next step. And the next step is congregational teams. And that's our faith houses. We teach them how to organize as well. We teach them how to get their concerns and issues, bring them into the space, and move on that the same way we did with the community. But the congregational teams they're more effective because they're faith leaders.
Yes.
They're faith leaders. And once we teach them how to organize, hold a research actions, and once we build that congregational team, with a congregational team, we have 3 different type of trainings that we do. Number one, we do what you call the world as it is and the world as it should be. That's the first orientation training. Secondly, we move on to community organizing, teaching them how to community organize and how to be a community organizer. And last but not least, our last training we do with congregational teams is how to do a powerful one-to-one, a conversation. We can have a one-to-one every day, and it is amazing those concerns and issues that you hear from the people in the community, and how much you can go with those concerns and issues when you want to start making a change. And after we make that research action, we hold space in the research action. We have what you call our public action, and that is when we bring that change. We have already found out the issue cut, and we bring that to the public square, and that's when we will meet with our elected officials face to face. We bring those concerns and issues to the forefront. We tell them we started off with a purpose of the meeting. We bring all the data that we have, all the research actions that we did. We bring those to the forefront, and we do a powerful, bold ask. Policy change, just like Pastor Brand said. And we trying to influence those stakeholders and those who hold power, because once we get them in a space, we need that policy change. So it's up to them to make that policy change, and that's what community organizing is all about.
Okay, so thank you for that explanation. There are two things that you said that seem to be the thrust in terms of community organizing. Number one is building relationships, taking the time, becoming vulnerable to be able to build relationships. And then the second thing you talked about is networking, partnering with other individuals, with other entities that may not necessarily be of our faith, that may not necessarily be of our skin color, that may not necessarily be part of our, our gender, but we all, as human beings, have common needs, and so whether it's food deserts and the lack of good nutritional places to get food, that affects you whether you're black or white or if you're living in a particular neighborhood. So being able to come together, to network, to partner, to build that coalition, to, as you say, organize individuals so that when you do ask, make that big ask. It's not, number one, you're not asking a stranger because they know who you are, and you know who they are. And number two, you're not asking by yourself, but now you have a team, a crew, a congregation, or maybe the whole community behind you making that ask. So listen, there may be somebody, and I guess the best example of the impact of a community organizer is President Barack Obama, who himself was a community organizer, but somebody who wants to get into that, who wants to who sees the value in engaging in the community in that way. How can somebody get started in terms of community organizing work?
Well, I was that someone. So what I did, this happened in 2020. The churches, we was not meeting in person, and I wanted to do more. I said, okay, I did basketball ministry. I said, I need to get involved in the community a little bit more. So I had to ask around. I said, who's doing work? Who's doing voter engagement work? Who's doing gun violence prevention work? And Minister Fred Willow said, hey, talk to Stephanie Strong. She's with Faith in Action Alabama. So I talked to Stephanie Strong. I said, Stephanie, I want to get involved. What's going on? I need to do a little bit more. And I came right in at a statewide voter engagement campaign. And I volunteered my service on that campaign, and we reached out to about 67,660 Alabamians, encouraging them to vote. That's through text messaging, phone banking. And after that, we reached our goal, We reached our goal, and she said, you want to hang on a little bit more longer? I said, sure. And she said, well, we got another reformative justice campaign. I said, what you need? She said, we need to talk to individuals who've been directly impacted by the criminal justice system. They have not been treated equally. They have not been asked for equal access to liberty. I said, well, that's right around my corner. I can talk to a couple of people. I started having one-to-ones with guys who have been directly impacted by the criminal justice system.
Yes.
And next thing you know, I became a part-time organizer, So you have to be hungry for it. You have to look around and see who's doing the work in your city. See who's doing the work in your city. Go to those city council meetings. Go to those county commissioner meetings. Go to the board of education meetings. Find out what's the problem and concern yourself. Because if there's no one doing the work, guess what? You can start doing the work yourself.
Yes.
You can start doing the work yourself. But if anyone is interested in community organizing in the state of Alabama, hey, you can reach us at www.faithinactionalabama.org.
Okay, just say that again. www.faithinaction.org.
Yes, faithinactionalabama.org.
Oh, sorry, faithinactionalabama.org.
Yes.
Well, listen, LeGarrette, thank you so much for just teasing us, and we're going to have you back to
Yes.
unpack more of this idea
Oh,
in
yeah,
terms of engaging the community, especially because part of what we do in terms of public affairs and religious liberty, yes, there is the aspect of dealing with making sure that individuals are able to practice their faith in freedom, but there's also the public affairs aspect in terms of building relationships with
yes.
community leaders, building relationships with legislators, so that we can be proactive in sharing with them this is the impact of this particular piece of legislation that you're proposing. This is the impact that it's having on this community. And we'd like to partner with you to be able to tweak this so that it doesn't have the same devastating unintended consequence on our particular community. So
Right, right.
thank you for that. Thank you.
I got one more thing.
Yeah.
Faith in Action Alabama has a bill that is going to be coming out at this year's legislative session. And this bill is going to eliminate fines and fees and restitutions as roadblocks for individuals to vote.
Mm-hmm.
So we are doing 8 weeks of advocating for this bill, and we do need this bill to pass. And a lot of Alabamians will be able to vote because we found out that the money, restitutions, is what's holding them back.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thank you. And we appreciate you. And we'll be right back with our final segment. So every show, we want to end with kind of giving some ideas about what and some information in terms of what's happening around South Central Conference in the area of public affairs and religious liberty. And so I've invited Amira Al-Haddad, who is the director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Southern Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, located in Atlanta, Georgia. And she is responsible for dealing with all religious liberty and public affairs issues within. Now, Amira, forgive me. Go ahead and state the mention the states that you cover within this southern United States.
Well, it's the 8 southeastern United States, so that would be Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia. Who am I forgetting? North Carolina, South Carolina, and I'm going to get in trouble for missing one.
Did you say
Did I say
Mississippi?
Georgia? Yeah, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. So the whole southeastern United States. So for us here on this program this evening, that includes 8 states and 8 conferences, almost 300,000 Seventh-day Adventists in this territory.
Mm-hmm. Now, specifically when dealing with South Central, we're dealing with Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, and the panhandles of Florida. And so, as I stated earlier, each show we want to kind of just highlight some things that are happening, or maybe kind of just give us a heads up on some things that we want to be aware of that may be happening. And so, what can we be, or what should we be on the lookout for within South Central when it comes to public affairs and religious liberty?
Well, one thing that we're already doing is we are already monitoring all of the state legislatures for your conference, for all of the states that are in your conference. We're monitoring those. Your sessions have all begun. Florida is already filing, even if their session hasn't begun. We're looking at a lot of different bills relating to religious liberty, personal religious liberty within these states. Remember that we're southern states. We are traditionally conservative states. We are traditionally states that want to preserve religious liberty because fundamentally we have a very heavy Bible-based constituents throughout the not just with Seventh Day Adventists, but throughout the population itself. One thing that happened about 2 weeks ago is that Alabama's governor, Kay Ivey, issued a executive order, order number 733. If anybody's interested in going and looking at the 7 or 8 pages of the order, the order was essentially to uphold and to reiterate a former already passed bill in Alabama called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And so this isn't a new bill. It's not a new piece of legislation. It's simply Governor Ivey saying, we want to remind everyone that this is available. This is something that we have passed. Going forward, this is what you need to look at when it comes to religious freedom. And so I would tell people, if you want to get a better feel for why Governor Ivey did that, or why there is a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, you really have to go back to 1990 when the Supreme Court issued its verdict in a case called Smith versus Unemployment of Oregon Unemployment Department of Labor, or Oregon Department of Labor. And Mr. Smith was a Native American who smoked peyote as part of a religious ceremony. He was terminated from his job, and he failed to get his unemployment because at the time that he was fired, the state of Oregon had listed peyote on its list of controlled substances. And so the state of Oregon said, you violated a state law. Mr. Smith said, no, I was exercising my free exercise beliefs in smoking peyote in a religious ceremony, not as a recreational drug, but as a religious ceremony. And that I shouldn't be excluded from unemployment because of that. Because to do so, you would deny my religious liberty rights in order for me to get my unemployment rights.
Yes.
So the Supreme Court argued against Mr. Smith. And at that time, immediately it became clear to defenders of religious liberty that they needed to step it up a little bit and do something to take care of what the Supreme Court's decision, the underlying problems with the Supreme Court's decision. So in 1993, President Clinton was Bill Clinton was the president. He passed this bill with strong Democrat support, which is kind of ironic because in the 30 years that this bill was passed, now Democrats tend not to support these bills, and Republicans do support the bills. At the time that this was passed, Republicans didn't like the bills because they were pro-business, and these bills were not pro-business. They were more pro-employee. So things kind of can change really quickly in the religious liberty world when you start politicizing religious freedom. This is a perfect example of that. I thought it was very interesting, for at least for us in the Religious Liberty Department, that in the press release that came out of the governor's office, they specifically mentioned the case with Oakwood Academy's Mustang basketball team.
Basketball team.
They,
Yes,
they
absolutely.
made it a point to talk about that incident and to tell people, this is something that we want to protect in the state of Alabama. We don't want this to happen in the future. So I think that that's very important, and it's significant. It's just something that I kind of want people to keep an eye on, especially in light of the way the current political situations are scrolling through history. I tell people that normal isn't coming back, but Jesus is. And that's my new tagline. I stole it off of Amazon, some product off of Amazon.
Yes.
But that's it. And then flipping that to the other issue that we've been talking about today, justice, compassion, community involvement. And I saw Barbara Barnes gave me a big shout out up here on the chats a minute ago. Hi, Barbara. I was the Adventist Community Service and Disaster Response Director for the Southern Union for 7 or 8 years right before the pandemic began. And one thing that I have constantly told my religious liberty leaders throughout the conferences is that you need to get together with your Adventist community service leadership there in your church, because these are two areas that overlap. They kind of cross in, you do those
Yes.
circles in
Yeah. Yeah.
in math class, and so you've got a subgroup within the two groups,
Yes.
and that subgroup is community engagement, both for Adventist community service, disaster response. And by the way, South Central has one of the best ACSDR teams that we have in the Seventh Day
Yes.
Adventist Church, and I'm very proud that the Southern Union has your team in our territory, because I get to brag on my conference people that I love. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Shout out to
but
Barbara Bonds and Lily
and
Buckingham. So,
Lily Buckingham. I saw a picture of Lily when Pastor Wilson was putting up her pictures of the disaster response
absolutely.
services that they were doing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I think that one thing that we want people to know is that religious liberty is here for our church members. We're here to help you, not just for Sabbath accommodation issues, but for any religious accommodation issue that you may encounter. We ask you to trust us. We are in this not for ourselves, but because we believe that religious liberty is a gift from God to us, and we want
Yes.
to protect that gift. I know that in South Central, you take your religious liberty offering in the fall, but we still have the Religious Liberty Campaign where we're collecting names for the magazine. And one of the things that I like to say about Liberty Magazine is that this is another tool of engagement that your church can use as a segue into your community, because
Yes.
maybe you haven't engaged your mayor in the past, but maybe the mayor of your city has gotten Liberty Magazine the whole time they've been mayor. A great way to introduce yourself is to say, hey, are you getting Liberty Magazine? Well, my church is sending that to you. I just thought I'd come in and say hi and see if you're liking the magazine, see if you read it. You know, is there anything that we can do to partner
Yes.
with the city? So those are very important little things that we do that actually make a big difference. And it is sometimes the only connection that people make with us, especially if we're a small community like Selma,
Yes.
with the number of people that we have in Selma who are Seventh day Adventists versus the overall population. I mean, if you can imagine the line to the Selma church being so long that someone thought there was a traffic accident,
That's
that doesn't
amazing.
happen on most Sabbath mornings.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But we definitely want to let you know that all of this works together, and you can use these as tools together.
Well, okay. Well, thank you very much. Again, we appreciate you, and I know, from time to time we'll either have you representing the Southern Union, or we'll have Kevin James representing the Southern Union, because it's important for us to know what's happening. Many of us may not have our ear to the ground in the same way that you and Kevin do, and so as you put your ears to the ground, and as you can sense, and as you can feel, and as you hear rumblings, you're able to share with us, hey, listen out for this, or be mindful of that, or be careful about that, to be able to know where we are going and how things are changing. You mentioned in terms of, depending on the politicizing of things, it can swing one way or another. And so we appreciate you being on the show. We appreciate you giving us that insight. And again, we're very extremely proud of our Oakwood Adventist Academy boys basketball team. They're going back into the playoffs, and so the schedule has completely changed to accommodate Sabbath. There is no issues with being forced to play on the Sabbath and forfeit the game. So we're very grateful that God has used the example of these young men to be a witness for him and to change laws. To change laws. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. So we want to thank you for joining us here at the Public Square. We want to challenge you to take this idea of community engagement seriously, to take this idea of the Lord has not just called us to gather in church and to feed ourselves, but he has called us to be a light in our community, to be salt in our community, to make a difference in our community. And in order to do that, we have to build relationships and we have to network. So whether it's as a church, whether it's as an individual, whether you do engage in community organizing, or you pick a need in the community and begin to meet that need, we want it to be said of you and your congregation that if something happened to your congregation in your community would miss you. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again in the public square.